Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's event from the Jesus College Intellectual Forum. My name's Julian Huppert. I have the great pleasure of running the Intellectual Forum here and putting together a whole range of activities for you, whether you're here in this wonderful Frankopan Hall in person or you're joining us online from wherever in the world you happen to be. I think there are still some countries we have yet to get representation from, but we're making it pretty thoroughly. It's great to have you here. So Jesus has been around in some form, originally as a nunnery, since the 12th century. And since 1144, people have come here to think and talk about some of the biggest issues of our time. I don't think they spoke much about AI back then. I think there were slightly different pressing issues. The printing press being one of the issues that I'm sure people would have spoken about. But over those hundreds of years, there have been amazing events. The Intellectual Forum is a bit more recent. We've been here since 2016. And during that time, we've had a whole range of different activities on many, many, many subjects. One thread that we have come back to time and time again is to do with AI. The positives, the negatives, all the different issues that might arise from it. So we've run events looking at AI in healthcare. We worked with Wellcome Trust there. We've run a series of summits for leaders in responsible AI. We ran an event earlier this year looking at the future role of doctors. What is a doctor for when you have AI? We've had a panel about British government's policy, and there's so much more. And it's an area we really are going to continue coming back to time and time again. One of the people who's been really key to that is one of our senior research associates, who you'll meet in a minute, Ray. And it's great to welcome Ray here to launch the book that he's written with others. And so we're going to hear about that wonderful book. We'll have a conversation, and then there'll be a chance to have a drink and to buy the book. So if you're here in the room, there are books available for sale back there, thanks to our friends from Waterstones. If you are not in the room, I don't know where your nearest good bookshop is, but it definitely has copies of this book because it's a good bookshop. So it really is wonderful to have so many people here and such a wonderful panel, an international panel here in the UK and in the US coming in from Zoom. But I'm particularly delighted that a real star has agreed to actually chair this, so a big upgrade from my normal role in chairing. And so it's a great pleasure to hand over to Tabitha Goldstaub. I could spend the next 20, 25 minutes talking about all the things that she's done. I got to know her through COGEX. She's chaired the UK government's Council on AI. She's run Innovate Cambridge. But she's also just a really, really good person. Tabitha, it's great to have you here. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you very much, and no pleasure. Thank you very much. I'm really thrilled to be here for two reasons. One, because this book actually made me feel a little bit hopeful for the first time in quite a while. As an optimist, that's saying something. And also because this book, for me, feels like a call to arms to get more people to take action. And so to see all of you here in the room effectively, hopefully, taking some action either before, during, or after is great. So what I thought we'd start with is a hands-up approach, so we just get a feel for who's in the room. And hopefully I can then tailor some of the questions to what I see. And we will leave time for your questions, because again, it's probably much more important than mine. So we'll come to those at probably about 8:15, and we'll be ending at 8:40. So think of yours all the way through and tee them up. Is Miriam? I'm about to do some introductions to the panel. One of them will be looming above us, Miriam. But oh, there she is. Hello, Miriam. What a great suit. We can't hear you yet. Oh, there you are. Hello. Can you see us? Yes, good. Excellent.
I can see the speakers, unfortunately not the audience. I wish I could.
Ah, well, we're about to do a hands up to find out who's in the audience, so I'll tell you what I see. So we're going to start with, put your hands up if you work in or closely adjacent to the AI industry. Okay, keep your hands up if you are optimistic about the chances that AI is going to give us in the next 5 years. Okay. So Miriam, I can see probably 20% of the audience in the AI industry not quite sure if they're optimistic or pessimistic, but I'd probably say half and half. And yeah, a bit more optimistic. Okay, good. Obviously, there's my bias there. And put your hands up if you are not in the AI industry and you're here to hear more all about it. Okay, that is great. Keep your hands up if you are optimistic about the chances that AI has for a greater future in the next 5 years.
Oh dear.
Oh dear.
We've got some work to do.
Oh dear.
Okay. No, I think that's really sensible. I think that's really sensible. And coming here today to hear more from our experts is probably a good start. So who have we got here today? Who have you come to see? The amazing authors of Governing the Machine, Ray Eitel-Porter, Paul Dongha, and Miriam Vogel. We have an old friend of mine, Ray, who we actually met in this room with Stuart Russell a very long time ago, one of the stalwarts of the AI industry. He was, at the time, creating the responsible AI practice at Accenture and did an incredible job taking many companies through that experience and is now advising people directly. Then we've got Miriam Vogel on our Zoom, the CEO of Equal AI, which is a not-profit supporting AI adoption by promoting literacy. And she served as the inaugural chair of the US National AI Advisory Committee, something that we should talk about offline. And Paul, the man that they call teaches the banks to think, Nat West's head of responsible AI and AI strategy. So you've got a great set of people to take us through how we do govern the machine and how to navigate the risks and unlock its true potential. So I thought we'd start with hearing a little bit from Ray about what motivated you to write the book and the experience that led up to the publication.
Thank you, Tabitha. So I've been in the responsible AI governance space for sort of 8 to 10 years, I guess. And what I noticed over that period of time was an increasing capability from AI to do good things, but also increasing risks as we moved from what we might call traditional AI to generative AI to now AI agents. And what I also saw was an increasing nervousness on the part of companies to use AI because they were worried that it wouldn't work in the way that they intended and could cause harm. And so that's the point when I thought I really should actually sit down and try and kind of consolidate everything I had learned over the previous 8 years or so and create effectively a manual, a guidebook for senior business leaders and individuals who want to understand AI, but how to get the value out of it and not cause harm. And after writing for a few months, I realized that what I really needed to help me in that journey was someone with deep technical expertise, and that's when I turned to Paul, and somebody with legal expertise, a trained lawyer, which is Miriam, but also both individuals who have a long history of working in the responsible AI space, and thoroughly enjoyed the process of writing with them because I think it's a much better product from the debates and discussions that we had during that process.
I would agree, and hopefully we can show you some of that debate today. So you don't all have to agree with each other, even though you've spent so long writing the book together. So I think we'll come to Miriam next, because one of the things that, Miriam, you talk about a lot is who could this fail for? And I really like that approach. So I was wondering, who's this book for? There's a huge number of people who I think can gain insights, but who did you have in your mind when you were writing?
Well, thank you for that great question. It might seem surprising because this is a playbook on governance, and so you would think the audience is solely senior executives, board members, lawyers, which it is. But we also do a lot of work advising policymakers because they really want to know what's the balance between innovation and safety. And so that's something constantly in mind throughout and hoping to inform them as they make these decisions and for the general public, because, we're seeing this increasing AI acceleration, adoption, but a lack of return of investment. We're seeing a lack of engagement, particularly here in the US. You see these banks and huge companies making hundreds of millions of dollars of investments, and yet you talk inside the companies, the executives are hesitant to use it. So this is really a playbook for the average person to understand, how can I trust AI? Should I trust AI? And what are the metrics that should be in place to ensure it deserves my trust?
Really great, thank you. And Paul, did Ray have to twist your arm? Did you jump at the opportunity? What made you join the gang?
Well, Ray sent me an email and said, would you like to write a book with me? It took me about half a second to go, yes, absolutely, 100%. For me, it was really important that I participate in this. I did my PhD in AI back in the 90s, actually, in the early 90s on, if you believe it or not, agentic AI and modeling AI agents. And that thesis collected dust for like 20 years and didn't see the light of day. So when I had this opportunity came up from Ray, I thought, yes, I really want to go for this. And what really spurred me on was, having been a practitioner, kind of really understanding the detail from a computer science perspective, I realized we've got a bit of a problem here, because we've got non-determinism baked into some AI systems, and there'll be a lack of general understanding of how these systems work, because many of them are opaque. And I really wanted to peel back the layers on that and say, right, given that we have this problem, but given that we have a big appetite to want to deploy these technologies in sometimes very high-stakes organizations, how can we deal with that problem? And that's what motivated me to write the book.
I'll just add that Paul sent me a photo of the front page of his thesis. When we started talking about agentic AI in that chapter, I got this WhatsApp from him with a picture of this of his thesis.
Amazing, and to have done a thesis in agentic AI.
There's about 6 people in the UK.
I was going to say, there's not. Do you have a self-help group?
Yeah, well, yeah. If I went to a party and someone said, so what's your thesis about? After about 3 seconds, eyes would glaze over, reach for the wine. It was like, forget this AI stuff.
And now you must be invited to every dinner party in town.
I do get a few invites. It's quite nice.
The way it goes, isn't it? And I want to come to the sort of core risk framework and all of the details of the book. But first, I want to ask a question about agency and how you see what we can do with all of the information that you've given us. So today I was at the UK government's investment summit with Rachel Reeves talking, and it felt very much like our governments all across the world are quite enamored with the tech industry. And there's a challenge here where they're talking about blitz on bureaucracy, slashing red tape, regulation that slows things down, gruesome governance. And there's a rhetoric now that makes what we all know is really sensible feel a bit Ludditism. And I'm wondering, from all three of your views, and we'll come to Ray and then Miriam and then Paul, how do we ensure that books like Governing the Machine still feel cool and as sexy as I think they should be, rather than in the bucket of blitz on bureaucracy? Ray?
Well, I guess I have a hope that it will help, and let me explain how I think it might work. So in working with companies that are actually involved in implementing AI, so these are not the foundation model providers, the OpenAIs and so on, but these are the companies that take that technology and actually then try to turn it into practical products or services that people in this room would end up using. Those companies are actually quite cautious, and that's why there was a huge interest in generative AI when OpenAI first released ChatGPT, but then there's been quite a delay in actually seeing it come through into business value, because companies are seeing that there are lots of risks and challenges with that. And so I think that actually there is a hope that if companies adopt the ideas that we have in the book, that they will be that last bastion, if you like, that protects consumers, protects the general public, because they have put in place appropriate governance and guardrails, because they don't want to be the ones who are on the front headlines for it having gone wrong under their watch. And then maybe my next leap of faith is that the foundation model providers, like an Anthropic or a Google or an OpenAI, they do actually need revenue from these companies. So yes, they have consumer products, but ultimately they will need to get serious revenue from corporations. So my hope is that the corporations will exert pressure on them to actually help in controlling the AI and governing the AI, because that will become sort of a condition to it being used more widely by the companies who are building the end applications.
I really hope so. We can vote with our feet. Miriam, how do you feel about the agency question?
I think that, I really agree with Ray that that this is something where there is a role for policy. We're seeing laws across the world pop up. But good AI governance, for the most part, I don't know if I should sum up our book in one line, but good AI governance is good governance. It's a culture of building trust. It's recognizing risks before they transpire into problems. And if that is not motivation enough, some of those problems are liability. So the other way to think about this is not just what's on the AI policy horizon, but we really wanted to ground people in the reality of AI governance, if you're talking about the frameworks of liability that are currently on the books today. So we have 3 chapters looking at laws in the UK, in the US, and then a more global perspective where we're going to be applying tort law and contract law. And we've already seen, obviously, a lot of intellectual property, copyright in particular, play out in the courts. But a lot of how this will be decided, if it's liability that will motivate your company to do this good work, you want to make sure that you're considering how the courts will be applying AI to the frameworks that are currently in place across the globe.
And how, Paul, do you see sort of the social license to operate at NatWest and then more broadly for others when you're advising them?
Yeah, part of it, I guess it comes down to this word governance. And we actually, there's a story behind how we landed on the title. And Governing the Machine wasn't the first title that we thought of for the book. But as I was writing my sections of the book, it dawned on me that actually governance should not be seen as like compliance or a checklist. Governance is part of the process of developing an AI system for organizations like banks. So as organizations developing systems, if they are using generative AI, they'll typically have a very, very large model that does far more than they need. So a lot of the work in the book is about constraining the behavior of the model so that it does the right thing. So you start with this big thing and you want to ensure that as you kind of fine-tune it, or you craft it to behave and give the outputs that you want that are desirable, you stop it doing all the things that you don't want it to do, which is the inverse of the way software development has worked for much of my career, which is when you start with quite a small platform and then you augment it with more and more capability to build something. We're kind of the other way around here. We've got these big models and we're enamored by or allured by how capable they might be. But in fact, the real problem is how you make them behave in the right way. And governance, for me, is about getting in really early, rather than a compliance thing that you do at the end of a project. You're getting in really early, and there are many things we talk about in the book about how we can do that. So governance isn't an option. It's not a checklist. It's not something at the end. It's a thread that is throughout the process of developing an AI system. So I look at governance as quite cool now, rather than something dull.
Cool, and also like inherent to your culture.
Yes.
And obviously Miriam explains really well that there's existing regulation, but also in some places we're going to need social norms and culture to help us. How do you manage that at NatWest when you're trying to think about whether you will and won't do something that is technically possible and potentially legally possible?
Yeah, so we have an ethics council. We call it an ethics panel. I chair the AI ethics panel at the bank, and we have quite a rigorous approach. So every part of the bank that wants to build a system with AI in it, it goes through quite a rigorous assessment. There are various triages. It goes through an assessment, and my team will examine the results of that assessment, and then we'll talk to the business owner of that project, and we're challenging them, typically to find if there is the potential for things like unfair bias or privacy issues or something societally that might not be favourable. And our job as experts is really to tease that out. It's never in the designer's mind that the system should behave in a way that's undesirable. So that's one mechanism. But we also have recourse to the bank's values and purpose. So we publish those on our website. And those are the things that we stand by. So whenever we assess the use of AI, we assess it also relative to those values that we promote. And if the ethics team, through the panel, we recognise that maybe something could go wrong accidentally, we'll put in controls. We'll demand that our model validation teams put in controls to test that the system doesn't do the thing that it accidentally might potentially kind of do. So we have quite a series of processes, and we have technical tools which we go into in the book as well.
I'm going to come back to you about those controls because I'm really interested in that. What you've just described, is that then, have you normalized that in the book for your core risk framework? Because you've got these sort of 9 core categories. Tell me a little bit more about how you came to making sure that those were then relevant to any company.
Well, the 9 risk categories we landed on are really the most pervasive risks that we see in AI. So we have bias, discrimination, and then we have more refined risks, but that are becoming bigger, like hallucinations in generative AI. So what we've seen is the machine learning era had risks predominantly around discrimination and some marginalized groups being left out. But actually generative AI has increased the risk landscape, heightened some risks, and what we see is generative AI has actually broadened the risk landscape even further, maybe not so much around ethics, but more around security. We believe that the 9 risk areas are as applicable to all of those 3 sort of generations of AI, if you will. So generative AI does obviously produce and generate text and generates images and so on and so forth, but there'll be bias, there'll be hallucinations, and some of the techniques and tools that we talk about in the book are geared at those. So it was really important for us to ensure that we future-proof the book to the extent that we could.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that as well.
We did quite a lot of research, for the book, and we looked at risk frameworks around the world because there are a lot of very good frameworks out there. There's the NIST framework in the US, there's the EU AI Act, Singapore was well ahead in this space, OECD, there's a lot of different frameworks out there, but we couldn't find one that we thought was perfect in all respects. And it was a bit like a massive Venn diagram with lots of overlap, but we tried to take pieces from the different ones to create something that was comprehensive, whereas we felt that with all the others, little bits were missing in one respect or another.
You should publish a poster for AI nerds of the Venn diagram. I would absolutely love that. Miriam, Ray points out that obviously each country was very different, and that's the same with regulation. Do you have hope or see a pathway to some kind of multinational convergence? How do you see the way that obviously AI has no boundaries, but countries do, playing out in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when we think about and talk about a lot, I think there's a few different ways to answer that. Is it clear who the international body would be who could have the buy-in of all countries? I think we see the standards organizations moving ahead on that front, being technical and industry either specific or agnostic, depending on what the standards are, I think is one of the best paths forward. But what we try to do in the book is really be country, geographical, and law agnostic by looking to the company to take responsibility. So at the end of the day, no matter what country you're operating in or no matter what laws you're mindful of, there are going to be internal mechanisms and controls you have to have in place. You have to take responsibility in your organization, no matter how big or small, no matter how many customers, clients, people you impact, no matter how many employees you have to take responsibility. And so we give a lot of discussion about what the different policies are from different governments and regulatory frameworks that you want to keep in mind for best practices and for alignment. But at the end of the day, we really give guidance to an organization to make their good choices on good governance, because you really can't proceed. You could be regulation safe and AI risk high if you're not really putting mechanisms in place to make sure that you're thinking about the point that you raised at the beginning that we really bounce back to, which is, for whom could this fail?
Yeah. And I think, Paul, I'd love to understand how you manage, how you suggest people manage that regulation safe, risk high, and then also lack of knowing where the accountability sits. I think that is something that makes me uncomfortable, and it's slowing down progress in some places as well. People are feeling like the risk is on them as an individual if they're going to get something, if they're going to build something, and so in many companies it's not happening at all. Mm-hmm. So there's a risk of doing nothing. So I'm intrigued how you manage that.
And that is a difficult path to tread, and certainly what I've seen in large organisations, who owns AI risk and who is accountable? That's a really, really thorny question, and there isn't a simple anecdote I can say, right, here's the formula and off you go. So some organisations will treat AI risk as a completely new tier 1 risk that drives a lot of work. Other organisations treat AI risk as kind of cross-cutting. So it will manifest itself in policies to do with security, to do with data privacy, and to do with model risk. And typically banks have a model risk department that manage the risks of models. And I mean, I favour the latter approach. I believe AI is transversal, so it's a cross-cutting risk. But with that comes that thorny question of who is really accountable for the different bits, and is it easy enough to tease out the AI risk that's relevant to security versus data versus model? And that's proving, and I'm sure Ray's got some sort of stories on this as well with the companies he's worked with, it's proving really hard to do that. But those conversations, as hard as they might be, are really, really important, because that drives changes to policy. And banks love policies, and we have many policies. And they are Word documents, but they are really, really detailed and extremely precise. And when something's in policy, it drives workflow, it drives process, it drives accountability. And that says what a particular department is responsible for every single use case. And it's worth spending a long time getting that part right, because that is really the foundations of how you do AI risk management across the enterprise. So it is difficult. It's quite fraught in some cases. But what it also does, and what I've found, is actually having these discussions matures the understanding of AI risks within the organization. So there are many people who don't quite understand risks of AI, and unsurprisingly, right? But we keep coming back to this, certainly in the organizations I've worked with. You need to have a culture of learning and development and finding out how AI can behave and what to guard against. And all teams need to do that. So we have persona-based training. And I think it's a combination of those two, the cultural change, as well as your enterprise risk management framework, really locking in who's accountable for what.
Maybe just a couple of additions to that. So I completely agree. But if thinking about perhaps organizations that aren't like banks, that don't have such a well-developed compliance and risk framework, because banks really do, and regulated industries typically have a lot more, policy and controls in place. I find that for other industries, actually the most important thing is having it led by somebody who is really committed and passionate about the area. It doesn't really matter if it's a chief data officer, if it's legal, if it's information security, or who it is, but it needs to be somebody who really wants to do it. It needs to be somebody who has budget, and it needs to be someone who has enough political clout that they can get everybody else on board, because Paul's point is really important. This does cut across the whole organization. So if legal run it, let's say, and data science won't have anything to do with legal, you've got a problem, or vice versa. So it has to be someone at the senior level who can actually get the right people around the table, a big group of people around the table, and get them all to participate, knowing their roles, but being supportive and collective.
And then someone with also
just wanted to underscore that point. The accountability question you asked, how can we make sure someone's accountable? Our goal with this book is also to make sure the average consumer and employee is asking that question, and to establish this through soft governance and establishing norms. I think we collectively all agreed we've never seen AI governance work where there's not accountability at the C-suite. If you don't have the buy-in, the budget support, that kind of safety cover, because you need to let your employees know they're your front lines. And if they feel safe to raise an issue with you, you will hear them. If you don't give them that safety, they'll have to find other avenues, other outlets to express their concerns. So it has to be accountability at the highest level internally. And on top of that, just to underscore Ray's point about it really doesn't matter which role specifically. About 6.5 years ago, we launched a badge program for senior executives at Equal AI. And we thought the most important point was, for whom is this class? It has to be targeted towards what, is it a CTO, a chief data officer? Who is it? And what we found consistently in the class, it's a different person in the organization. It grows over time to different roles. And that's part of what makes it so effective, that when you have these conversations properly, like we were fortunate to in writing this book, it's multi-stakeholder perspective. And it's just somebody who has the understanding of the liability and the opportunity and needs to have that on their plate of responsibility, so that when they come to the conversation, they're thinking through all the liability, all the opportunities, and have the budget and buy-in to make sure that the organization can follow their direction.
And you raise the question that's clanging in my head is, and so what, as a user, the general public, what recourse do people have once they've understood and seen either for themselves, their friends, or just got the spidey senses that this isn't, this isn't cool? What do they do next?
That's a great point. I think, first of all, there is a spidey sense. When we look at all the studies for AI governance, companies that have it in place have a much higher trust rate. McKinsey had an AI survey this year for companies that have CEO responsibility for their governance of generative AI. There's a significantly higher proportion of product value, of consumer trust and success of their generative AI product. I won't bore you with all the numbers, but you can look at different roles down the line. And when you have that framework in place, customers know and feel it. You can think from your own experience about which companies you have that trust in and which you don't. It's because you have examples of, if a mishap comes up, they take action that you think is responsible. They take it swiftly. They clearly have a process in place and are not scrambling because it's something they've thought on. It's part of their value to make sure that their AI governance is in place and that there's a clearly communicated process.
And I think one thing, one thing that general public can do is to vote with their feet, in a sense. And if you look at the statistics, various surveys have been done in the UK that show that the general public are more negative or more nervous about AI than positive on balance. And you'd like to think that if companies come forward with products or solutions and people don't trust them and aren't reassured by what the company is saying and the transparency and the proofs that they're putting on the table about the AI, you'd like to think that people would then say, well, actually, I'm not going to use that. I'll use a product from somebody else instead.
And in the UK, we have GDPR, so at least they feel some recourse. But Paul, you go ahead.
No, exactly. Just to build on that, I'm quite fortunate being in a regulated industry. So building on the foundations of GDPR, we promote the right to redress and a path for contestability. So that's part of the work that we do. I think it's really important making customers aware that when they're subject to automated decision making, there is an avenue that they can take to talk to us about why certain decisions were reached. So I think that's a really important part of it. I think the other thing that helps is certainly the organisation I work for, we publish our AI and data ethics code of conduct on our public-facing website. It's really easy to do, but we only do it because we've got mechanisms in place to deal with each of those principles that we put out there. So it's partly about saying, yes, we do use AI as an organisation, and there are some aspects which we really, really care about, the most important things like privacy, security, personal data. We take those as foundational parts of what we care about, and we've got mechanisms in place to deal with those. And I think that's an important thing to do.
Has anyone in the room ever invoked their GDPR rights, general data protection rights? Good, okay. I think we should have a masterclass on how to do it. I have also invoked my GDPR rights, and I worry that this is a regulation that is slipping. And so I think it's really important we don't see it as the annoying thing we have to do in our emails, but actually as something that's really, really foundational to protecting our rights while we're online. So that's good. I know, right? Thanks. Yeah. Well, if for those who are interested, Tanya
just to point out, sorry, that
oh my God, sorry,
you're right, the GDPR, EU AI Act, there are requirements in place, but it's also a best practice. Yes. If a company goes to the effort of putting a robust AI governance system in place, they should also benefit from it by sharing it with the general public and telling them who they should contact if there is an incident. So a smart organization will be transparent about their process, the accountability, and invite that feedback. If not, you're likely to read about it on the front page of a newspaper or in a lawsuit. So there is subtle and not so subtle ways to encourage this best behavior in the companies.
We call that the Daily Mail test here. And on that, I'm intrigued, Miriam, to your thoughts on what the general public's role is in deciding what a company does and doesn't automate or doesn't use agentic AI for. Duolingo, I think, is probably the most recent famous, rushed into using AI for everything and just got inundated with vitriol for doing so. Did you talk at all about, in terms of governing, actually listening to people and hearing what they would like to see used with AI?
I mean, it's really the most important part, having mechanisms in place to listen. Internally, too many companies don't even have an internal system in place to hear from different stakeholders. They have one or two people maybe who are appointed to be thinking about it. So internally, making sure there's robust conversations and buy-in. A town hall is a good practice to share what you've come up with after you've gone to the efforts of putting a process in place. And the more you're communicating that with the general public, I think companies have the misunderstanding, or less savvy companies, not the companies we work with amongst the three of us, there would be a misperception that in advertising your governance process, you're inviting criticism because we're talking about AI. But I think the general public is savvy. We know we're talking about AI. There's going to be unknowns. The creators themselves, the developers in the labs, are saying they don't fully understand. You can read Jack Clark's post last week. They are saying very forthright statements that they do not fully understand what it is. And so I think a company can lean into that and put it out there what they are doing to put their best efforts to safeguard based on best practices like those in the book and elsewhere to build that trust. What other outlet does the average consumer have? I think we can't underestimate the power of discussions on social media, of asking these questions of companies. I think we want to make it routine to expect companies to share transparently what their governance process is so that it becomes an expected norm. But on top of that, again, we talk about the benefits to the companies that are doing it well. 90% of companies, according to some studies, are using AI. Less than a third have a cohesive framework in place. But where you are seeing those investments, you're seeing significant benefits, not just cost reductions in almost half, but increased consumer trust in at least a third of those companies. Again, a third enhanced brand reputation, and a quarter less AI incidents. And that's a really important piece. An AI incident is not currently a defined term. So if you have gone to the trouble to put a robust framework in place, you will be on the lookout. You will have a process in place to handle it, again, in such a way that it builds trust internally, which will also be felt externally, as opposed to being caught flat-footed and not having a process in place for these currently undefined, universally undefined terms.
Can I, one thing, just picking up on that internal point that I learned from Paul during writing the book, which I was really impressed about, as I understand it, your AI ethics council is open to membership from anyone Correct. In the bank. Maybe you can just...
Correct, yes. So the ethics, we call it a panel at NatWest Bank. So it's open to any permanent employee of the bank to attend. There's certain training people have to do and undergo to understand a little bit about ethics. But once you've kind of passed these tests, if you like, and done the learning, you're qualified to sit on the panel. And every panel meeting, We select randomly a number of people who are qualified to be able to attend, and we assign them personas. So, for example, someone will be assigned the security persona, someone the bias one, someone the unfairness one, someone privacy. And their job really is to examine every use case from that particular perspective. And then when the panel convenes, it's a matter of challenging the use case owner from that perspective. So it's a fairly long meeting. It's challenging. It's fairly detailed, and the idea is really to test whether or not any of those personas has teased something out that might otherwise not have happened. And we find that the kind of the multidisciplinary group that we have, the diverse group, does raise some, obviously raises some really interesting points. We still have most data science and machine learning teams comprised of men.
Yeah.
There will be things missed. So that's
really good.
Yeah.
It's really good.
And if anyone wants to create a book club around this book, I feel like that would be quite a good exercise to do together. I'll join the Cambridge contingent. One thing I did want to pick up on was Miriam's point about Jack Clark. If you haven't read or know him, he's the co-founder of Anthropic, and his post described how he felt was like fumbling in the dark as a young boy in his bedroom and not knowing where the lights were. That, to me, is quite terrifying.
Yes, it's not very encouraging.
It was not very encouraging. And so I think Miriam did describe really beautifully what if we did get this right and the benefits of getting it right. And so Paul and Ray, I want to come to you and ask the same question, is if we do turn the lights on, Jack, the co-founder of Anthropic, one of the largest models in the world, doesn't feel so in the dark, and we help him. What goes well? Like, what can we be hopeful for? Why is there so much effort that we should put into governing the machine?
Well, let me give a concrete example, which actually, really made me feel a bit better. So I was just asked to join the AI ethics panel for the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman. And this is a relatively small governmental organisation in the UK. And we had our first ethics committee meeting last week, and I went along, and the first meeting was kind of to brief the committee. And if I'm honest, I expected that they wouldn't be doing an awful lot with AI, and that there'd be everything more or less would be ahead of us. I found instead that they'd been thinking about it for a year. They'd got a group of people, volunteers, together within the organisation. They had come up with some very well thought through principles. Their number one principle was a human will make every decision. So AI will be used, but only to support people in making decisions. And they had thought really carefully about where most of the people in the organization are expert case reviewers who are looking at complaints that are made and going through large amounts of information to try and sort of figure out the situation. And they explained that actually a lot of their time is spent opening PDFs in document repositories which are just labeled document 1, 2, 3, whatever. So to find even the beginning of the case, they have to open dozens or hundreds of documents and look in them because there's no labeling or anything like that. And so they spend a large amount of their time just sorting through the material and putting it into chronological order and figuring out what's what. The AI can do that really well. And they were really looking forward to the prospect of having a lot more time to do useful work. As you can probably imagine, as a government organization, their budget is tight. They get more complaints coming in, that's growing. So the only way they can actually do more good work is to find ways to remove some of these, uninteresting parts of the work, but with a human in the decision-making, role for everything. And that really uplifted me because I thought this is a fantastic use case for AI. They're doing it really thoughtfully, carefully, and this is absolutely the way to go.
And somewhere where it's not taking away, it's not de-skilling anybody.
No, not at all.
And I think that's something I'd love to understand,
not at all.
Paul, from you, how you make sure that you're not de-skilling staff members when you're giving them such powerful tools. Some things, especially the graduate ecosystem, is really struggling under the weight of this new
technology. It's a really good question. And I think a lot of organizations say, oh, we're going to augment roles rather than replace roles. It's really
Sounds
easy.
Great, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's really easy. Oh, you're fine then. You're going to augment, fine. But let's talk about what augmenting means. Like really, let's really talk about it. So you go to call centers, call center operators, humans pick up phones, answer queries. Maybe many of those queries could be answered by an AI. There is the distinct possibility that can happen. So what do you do with those people whose roles are threatened? And I think on the one hand, although we don't talk about this a lot in the book, to be fair, you could say, no, some roles will just go, right? I'm sorry, we're just going to be really honest about this. As we've gone through generations, technology has made some roles redundant. But that doesn't mean the entirety of that role is redundant. So for example, talking to vulnerable customers, talking to those customers that we need to spend more time with so that we can provide a better service more suited to their needs. Well, there's an area to explore. That's probably one thing that's underexplored and underrepresented amongst maybe some call centers where there's a high turnover of staff, potentially low morale. So creating those or identifying those and then creating the role to be able to do that kind of work. I think organizations have to go out of their way and say, we're going to create some roles. And it's hard, right? It's hard to know. Even in the technology space, there will be new roles with the use of AI, data labeling, curating data, maybe ethicists, responsible AI folk. There will be new jobs and potentially new industries. But I would always advise, let's get ahead of the curve and start talking about them now. And with those people affected by AI that are part of our workforce, let's help them identify those roles themselves, because they'll be really close to what they do, and they'll know what else could be done, except the systems they have now have stopped them, and AI might give them an opportunity. So it's very much a work in progress, but I think we should aggressively pursue it.
Yeah, and it's funny, once again, I'm sorry, I know you wanted the controversies amongst us, but unfortunately, you're only getting, once again, the alignment. It's interesting, Paul, to hear your approach with so Equal AI has an AI literacy foundation, and we also have a corporate member side where companies come to us to align on best practices to make sure that they are doing what is best to be an AI governance leader. And recently we've aligned on 3 areas where AI use is optimized and safe and should be partnering with companies. So very much along the lines of what Paul just said. First of all, that they should be using it where there's a backup. Where is there such a backup of work where AI could support the employee to get through the workload, to get back up into speed? Second of all, what are the ways that are mundane tasks, where the repetitive mundane tasks where, again, AI could support so that they can have more time with the consumer, with their fellow colleagues, thinking, critical thinking, other types of human efficiencies that is less of the AI efficiency. And third, where could humans perhaps not add value that an AI may, looking at huge numbers of data for pattern recognition to understand customer trends and economic trends and so forth. So, I think focusing on those 3 areas with your employee base is a great way, again, to build trust and not get the lack of adoption and rejection of AI that so many companies are facing.
Now, I've got lots of more questions, but I want to get a show of hands of questions that you have, just so I know how long we're going to leave. Okay, I'm sure there's more than that. Yeah, okay, that's what I was thinking. I think we should go to questions first. I'm going to come to Sarah and then over here. And so if we could have one mic here and one there, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you. It sounds like good governance is only ensured at the moment by design, or it becomes self-governing due to fear of bad publicity or lawsuits, which isn't very soothing. But what's your dream or your ideal for holding AI enterprises to account for good governance in the future?
I think that's really nice. And I actually think, do you think you could keep your answers really short so we get one from all of you? Because I think they'll be slightly different. Maybe Ray, you could go first, and then Miriam, and then Paul.
What's my dream? Where you're going, I think, with the question is around legislation or not. Should there be regulation behind it? I think some degree of regulation is good, but I think particularly there are certain topics where I would focus most with regulation is actually where there's no economic incentive for companies to get it right. So as you said, you know, there are a number of things that companies don't want to go wrong because it looks bad for them and it loses them money. Maybe the market will solve for that, but there are other things like AI's impact on democracy, fake news. You know, there's a number of areas like that where I really think that we need government intervention.
Miriam, in one or two words?
Yeah, the balance, again, I think there are needs for external standards, which government is in the position to offer. We would not fly in planes or drive in cars if we did not know there were universal standards in place on brakes, odometers, et cetera. But then we need the companies themselves to be doing the internal work and demonstrating that use. So it's really overall governance where we want people to know what norms to have in place. But in terms of the outside role, aligning on standards, definitions, what should be tested and when. If you have a success rate, you need to be saying for whom that success rate is effective so that we know for whom could this fail, who's not identified in that success rate.
You know what, Paul, we're going to get one more question. No. Thank you. One more over here. Oh, over here, sorry, at the front. And then we can come to him next. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not an IT specialist. I'm just a religious scholar. But I have a question considering the truth, you know, the high notion of truth. But it relates, it's an ethical question because when I use ChatGPT and so it's very useful for translations also. But the problem is that that app or that type of technology doesn't have a discriminative knowledge of right and wrong, truth and false. And it gathers, it doesn't give sources where the knowledge derives, and so create its own idea of what we are asking. And so there, I think the ethical questions come, you know, of course legal issues are there, but the government and other people have to push these designers to be more ethical, and so it's not harmful to the humanity and doesn't distort the truth.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Right. Look, I couldn't agree more. And I think, well, certainly this is a personal perspective. If anyone thinks that they're going to use a chatbot to find the truth, please don't go there, right? It's not that, right? It's not that at all. And as maybe some people will know in the audience, because of the way AI behaves, right, it is non-deterministic, which kind of means that actually you can't really trust what it's going to say, and it will do this thing that they call hallucinations, which isn't really a hallucination, it's just a mistake. But I think what's fueled this thing, and this is where the learning and development comes in, there are people that kind of think this AI, you know, our brain has been decoded. There's some smart folk in Silicon Valley that figured out how to make a brain, and they made one, and it's soon going to be better than anyone's brain, and so on and so forth. And really, I want to bust that myth. It's a bit of tech, and some people, and you know, read a lot about this, the designers of those large language models, even they were surprised it was this capable. And you can read about that. They can say, my God, we just kept scaling it. Are you making it bigger and bigger and training it on more and more data? It's got this thing, this emergent thing that actually was never even anticipated by the designer. And now there are some unscrupulous organizations, I think, that are exploiting that to say, oh, AGI is here, artificial superintelligence is here. I don't believe that. There's a danger that the tools could be misused, for sure. There's many other dangers. There's automation bias and potentially the impact on society. Really think we need to have open discussions about this with the public, with non-technical people, and explain this to them, and explain the dangers. Tell them that look, there's nothing to really be scared of. It's a computer program, but in the wrong hands, used for the wrong purposes, it can be really dangerous. So I'm crying out for more discourse, more awareness. To Miriam and Ray's earlier point, I really, really do support our democratically elected functions need to step in, potentially legislate, but at the very, very least, our sectoral regulators need to step in and really be hard and lay down what is and isn't permissible. The final point on that, I've kind of gone a bit off piece to maybe not quite answering the question, but I'm really lucky. The organizations that I interact with, they really want to get this right. They want to get this right. I have people that come to me asking for a job in my team every week. No end of people saying, I'm really concerned about ethics, Paul. Can I work in your team? So rather, you know, and I want that groundswell to increase so that actually organizations like banks, they're not doing something because they have to from a governance perspective. They're doing it because they know they need to do it and they believe it's the right thing. That's what I'd really like to get to.
We're going to take the gentleman in green and then the lady in white and then a question from online.
Thank you, everyone. Hi, Pete Lee. Thank you very much for this book. I think it's a really, really valuable contribution. My question is about the emergent theme of agentic AI. I wonder if you could say something about this, because I know it's not fully formed yet about how we might govern that. I'm hoping Paul might have an answer for this. Yeah, particularly something around human in the loop, perhaps, as well.
We're going to be as quick as we can, because there are so many good questions. I can feel them in the room.
Okay, I'll try not to digress. So agentic AI. So it's, when ChatGPT was launched, it used this new technology called a transformer, right? It's a new bit of software. It's really smart. Agentic AI is not a new AI, right? It's not something new that's been invented. What it is it's Gen AI, so these large language models, doing a little bit more than they used to do. And one of the things that they can do is they can generate prompts as they go and do more generation of text. Some people call it reasoning. It's not reasoning, it's just doing more. And now some other organizations have developed these things that allow an AI system to talk to other tools and other systems and maybe other large language models. So this augmentation of generative AI with a few extra capabilities gives us agentic AI. And some people have jumped on this and gone, oh, well, that's wonderful. I don't need people in my organization. I'm just going to have 20,000 agents. We'll have them all running around doing jobs. And, you know, we know who some of the organizations are. We need to be really careful. We need more risk controls, more risk frameworks. Some of those tools are being built. We talk about them a little bit in the book, but I think that's going to be the next really big area of work. A lot of people are working on that.
But Paul, would you say is it true to say that if you follow the framework and best practices in the book, whether you're talking about agentic AI, narrow or generative, you'll be in good standing?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I wanted to check on our alignment. I'm looking for the context.
Absolutely. There might be a bit more to do. There might be a book 2 coming out.
Oh, good.
Yes, but you're right.
Let's get the lady in the white in the middle, the one up at the top, if we can get a mic up there.
Yep. So the adoption of agentic AI, we've seen a lot of news articles, everything about how the fact that all these companies, they will, like, it's not going well. I work at Shell. I know that's not going well. So that's one question. The second one I had is AI engineers, right? What about low-code solutions and things? Is the role from an AI engineer going to kind of diminish?
I take the adoption one, and you better do the low code, I guess. So adoption of agents, I would say it's a little bit like generative AI when it first came out. Lots and lots of companies are looking at it, they're thinking about it, but they're also very nervous about it because the fact that agentic AI, its name means it has agency. So the generative AI can not reason, but do something that's a bit like reasoning. So it can gather information, it will analyze the information, it'll come to a conclusion, but then it can go off and actually do something. But the doing something means that the risk is much higher because it could go off and book a ticket, or it could go off and, you know, issue a prescription to somebody, and that introduces a massive amount of increased risk. Add to which the fact that these agents typically work in teams of multiple agents, which is good in that each individual agent tends to specify in a step or part of the process. But the problem then comes that if each individual agent only has 1 or 2% of risk that it will go wrong, when you chain them together, those risks multiply. So your overall risk of getting an error skyrocket. So I think, yes, lots of talk, but there's still a long way to go before companies are really deploying these at scale. That said, you know, I was on a panel last week where someone from well, it was public, so it was the CTO of Expedia. He said they have 1,200 agents live and working in the organization at the moment. We didn't get into kind of exactly what they do, and I wonder whether the term agent means different things to different people in terms of how much agency it really has.
We're going to get a question up at the top.
You all use the term, I think you all use the term fail in relation to AI, by which I'm assuming you mean AI went wrong or AI did something wrong. Have you looked into at all inefficiencies introduced by AI?
Miriam? Ray?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're talking about the risks, we're more thinking about when they're applied, not whether or not. So I would say that that was not essential. I mean, inefficiencies in terms of, we did think a lot about it in terms of workforce. You know, I think there was a lot of move to adoption without thinking about whether it should be adopted. You know, in many cases, a human can do as well, if not better. And so really making that calculation in a more thoughtful long-term perspective is I would say, something we definitely endorse and talk about. But sorry, Paul, over to you.
Yeah, I think, so inefficiencies. So it's an interesting question because a lot of people are deploying AI for efficiency reasons. I'd probably say the jury's still out because we probably need to collect a lot more evidence of our use of AI more widely to see if it's inefficient. And I assume by inefficient you mean in a process perspective in an organization. From a compute perspective, it's highly inefficient, right? If you're talking about the technical implementation.
Can I give a quick example, the sort of thing I'm thinking of? So 10 people in a meeting, get to the end of the meeting, someone sends out the AI-generated notes and says there's 10 people. Here are the AI-generated notes. Can you all check them for accuracy? You've just generated 9 lots of work for people that shouldn't have been there before. I'm thinking about that sort of thing.
I mean, I guess there is potential for that. I mean, I've actually kind of seen the inverse in that example, where one person's reviewed the notes and gone, that's a really good summary, and sent them out as the minutes of the meeting. So I've actually seen it work quite well, rather than getting everyone to check that the AI did the right thing.
I would maybe just add that actually for me, AI governance includes making sure that the AI is going to deliver value. So one of the first tests before you use AI should be, is it actually going to help? Yeah. And help would be increasing rather than decreasing efficiency. Or is it going to make my customers happier? Or is it going to be, you know, it needs to prove a return on, you shouldn't just do it for its own sake. So if you find that it is being inefficient, or the way people are using it is inefficient, then you shouldn't be doing it, and that should be part of your test.
Yeah. Can I get some hands again so I can remember where we're at?
Lots over here.
So many over here. We'll get one from Steph and one from the gentleman
Julian
behind,
wants.
and then Julian online, maybe. Okay. Oh.
Hi, thank you so much. I have a question. Miriam mentioned finding a balance between innovation and safety, which I really like that approach because I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I feel very frightened about that being unbalanced. One of the things that I worry about is whether AI is making people stupider. By that I mean creating this frictionless world where no one has to think for themselves and everybody just says stuff into machines. I'm not the best example because I don't use ChatGPT. I was calling it ChatGDP for a long time. So I'm not a good example of that because I don't really use it. But I do worry when people are like, oh yeah, I had to cancel loads of meetings because my AI broke, and so 6 hours of work I couldn't deliver to the client. And I'm thinking, well, what happens if it breaks and you're not able to continue to use your brain? Do you worry about that?
I think, should we get 3 questions and then you can answer them together? Let's get the gentleman behind you as well. And then you can pick which one you want.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I guess AI often replaces existing human processes, and those human processes have bias and they have error in them. Imagine that you have an AI that has half the bias and half the error, but you can measure it. Is that a sufficient defense, or do you have a class action waiting to happen?
That's a good one. Okay, so we've got, let's get one more. I feel the gentleman in red.
Ray, you said that you think that the market will probably solve for best practice, at least in commercial applications, so which I'm sure is right. Did you sort of come down in general sort of for or against more the sort of European precautionary approach to regulation versus the US innovation approach?
Okay. So we've got, Ray, maybe you want to take the market-solving European approach.
Okay.
Miriam, the innovation safety balance, making people stupider. And then, Paul, do you want to take the human process replaced bias, if we can measure it?
Second question. Thank you for that.
That's a difficult one, Richard. So a year ago, I was kind of much more optimistic about the EU AI Act, and I thought that there was a chance it would be a little bit like GDPR, would become a de facto kind of standard, because it's really quite difficult for companies to have very different standards in different areas of the world, because it's very expensive to do so. But, and it'd be interesting to get Miriam's view on this, but I think that the US has moved so far in the opposite direction that I'm no longer kind of confident that that's likely to happen. And they're putting so much pressure on Europe that Europe's even thinking about diluting and so forth. So I do think there are areas where regulation is really important. I would fight hard for the ones where, as I mentioned earlier, you know, the democracy things, social media should have been regulated a long time ago. It causes massive amounts of harm. You know, those kinds of things where there is no incentive whatsoever on companies to behave, that's where we really need to focus, I think.
Yeah. Miriam, do you want to take the innovation and safety balance?
Yeah. The cognitive decline piece, or
yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's such an important point. There are studies showing that people are increasingly on cognitive decline when they're more reliant on LLMs for their answers. So I think it's critical that we align on best practices. It's critical that we make sure that AI literacy is a known concept, that we're teaching, first of all, teaching people they're using AI. Too often people do not know they're using AI. Making sure that we marry the conversation of risks and opportunity. Most audiences are afraid of AI, which is fair, but we need to give them mitigation strategies, as we try to do in this book, so that we can get to the opportunities and the meaningful ways that they can benefit themselves, their families, their business, their communities. And one of those absolute risks is cognitive decline. We have to align on when you should be reliant and when you shouldn't, particularly in schools. I see too many schools here in the US, my own daughter's school, looking at AI as a breach of the honor code, instead of using it as one of the few trusted places and one of the few infrastructure sources in place where we can teach when and how to use AI. When is it cheating? When is it useful and constructive? So we need to have more of these places of alignment and education to teach people when they are not using it, not only to make sure that our next generation is clear on what is cheating and what is not, what is useful, and how to make sure their critical thinking skills are useful. But also, we're seeing a lack of adoption. There's, as I mentioned, or I don't know if I mentioned, there's a gender gap, an age gap, a regional gap here in the US. And when you ask women what's the basis for the gender gap, they often will give you two predominant answers. One is a privacy concerns. One is a fear that it's cheating, this cognitive decline. So we need to make sure that women are not left behind, that they're using AI. And part of that means, how do we use it so that it enhances your critical thinking, as opposed to the opposite, cognitive decline, that this great question asks.
Thank you. Here. Paul, so if we could measure bias, would that be?
Yeah, I'm measuring bias. I think on the question that's posed, if I go back to the book, we talk about the 9 risk areas. So we talk about, you know, accuracy, reliability, robustness. These are the resilience. These are the things that we talk about in the book, and techniques to ensure that they're maintained or improved. So there are techniques to work with Gen AI to ensure that for a particular use case, you craft your AI, I'll call it your AI, so that for that use case, it's as competent as it could be. And to achieve that, we do measure against the humans who do the same process at the moment, and I've got examples of this not too far away from home, where we're actually using the human output as a baseline. So we'll do an A/B test, we'll have the AI running, you know, doing the stuff that's being done with the current, let's say, manual or non-AI process, and then we'll evaluate against the two. And we will measure and we will score. And there are techniques in the book that tell you how to go about doing that. So the bias that we might see manifest itself in chatbots is not the bias that we see manifesting itself in quite mundane business use cases, right? Because it's not just text that you're talking about anything. You're talking about a particular use case, you're talking about it in a particular workflow for particular teams. And I think we're in the early stages of this AI industry, of Gen AI, when you think about it, since November 2022. I think there's a long way to go where organizations will use the tools for controls that are being built by many, many companies, and we talk about them in the book, that will get us to a place where I feel confident that the kind of issue that you talked about won't be an issue for businesses and their use cases. The only thing I'd like to add to that is, one of those use cases, one of the biggest skeptics of the ability of AI to replace the function that team was doing, the team lead said, AI can't do what my team can do. So we gave it a go, we embarked on the project, and now some of the team are saying, the stuff that AI did is actually better than I could have done. Look, no one expected that, right? No one expected that, and kind of least of all some people who thought it would be really good. But that's really taught us, and taught, I think, if organizations go down the path, it's a journey to understand how they need to craft the AI to do what it does. The answer's not in a manual that just says, right, follow these instructions. It's in our book. Yeah. I just finished.
And there is copies over there that you can buy. Miriam, am I right in thinking we need to say goodbye to you now? We'll say goodbye. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I look forward to more conversations with you.
Should we take two more really difficult questions for Ray and Paul just before we go? Should we take the one from online and then one more question? Who's going to put the hand up first? Oh, yes. Saw that one earlier. Okay.
There's been some amazing questions from online. Just to say very quickly, Roger Bass, CEO of Global Standard Money and Settlement, says hi to Ray, but suggests we could use AI systems to develop the governance themselves, and would that help us to accelerate? P. Gulworth talks about AI goal specification, but I really want to do the question from Claire Heath. As regulation becomes more prescriptive, do you worry that compliance checklists could replace moral reasoning, what Hannah Arendt called the capacity for reflection in the face of systems? How do we keep governance alive rather than bureaucratic?
Lovely. And the last one over here, and then you can take one each.
Mr. Paul, you mentioned earlier that AI models are capable of doing much more than it's supposed to, right? And also you mentioned that it's our responsibility to navigate it in the right direction, ensuring that it comes with an output that we need it to come with, right? So do you think that AI will eventually develop to that point when it realizes that it's being restricted and exploited, and one day theoretically refuses to obey? Thank you.
So Paul, why don't you take this one, and Ray, you take the one online, and then we'll close.
Yeah, I guess to your question there, which really, to me, is really a question about artificial superintelligence and things like fast takeoff and so on and so forth. So I think there's a spectrum of people, and including leading AI researchers, that think and claim that once AI reaches a certain capability, that it's going to be out of control, it will make copies of itself, it will learn that actually it shouldn't just follow orders of its masters and its humans, and then do something that it's not supposed to do. And at the other extreme, there are people that think it's never really going to work. I'm just somewhere in the middle. I'm quite boring. I actually think the biggest risk is that people will misuse it intentionally for social engineering, potentially political gains, for nefarious purposes, and so on and so forth. I think that will happen before this escape happens of artificial superintelligence. So you probably read Mr. Yudowski's book that works on this and talks about fast takeoff. I personally don't believe that's going to happen. It's theoretical, a lot of that. There are, and I'm happy to talk about it in detail, but there are certain leaps that are made by those researchers, which I don't really think carries weight. I think it's a low probability risk and shouldn't be ignored, and it can happen. But I think the main thing is that our use of AI, whatever use case that we create, we need to test the model, and I mean test and test and test. Both red team it, put good prompts in, put bad prompts in, and really exhaust it through a lot of testing. There isn't a mathematical formula that allows you to create or to answer that question, unfortunately, right? It has to be, that's the best tool at the moment. And we call them evals, evaluations. So organizations I know are doing a lot of this. They're doing it at scale. We're building an evaluation as a service framework within our organization. That seems to be some of the best tools that are available. And then fine-tuning models afterwards, which is a technical way of getting the model to stop doing that little thing. Yeah. I'll pause there. I hope that goes some way to answering your question.
And Ray, how do we keep governance alive?
Keep it alive. I mean, I think there is an important role for checklists in governance because you do need to have assessments and you need to go through standard processes of asking the right questions and so on. But the answers really aren't simple. Often we see situations where there is a trade-off, for example, between accuracy and maybe fairness. And in many situations, as you remove bias from a model, so the accuracy will go down, and an organization will have to figure out where does it want to make that trade-off. I've seen organizations try to sort of not completely automate, but introduce more automation into their risk scoring. So you look across a large number of questions and you try to, you allocate kind of points and, you know, the AI wasn't so good here and it was better here, etc. And then they try to weight them with percentages and all this sort of thing. And the reality is, in my view, that you can't do that. It's far more subtle. You can't really say, well, bias is a bit more important than privacy, or the security risk is higher than this risk. They're all important risks. And that's why I think, you know, things like at the ultimate instance, your ethics panel that has a group of people who are coming together and actually sit down and answer some of these really thorny questions is incredibly important. So I think, yeah, definitely it mustn't just become a tick box exercise. It needs to be very thoughtfully implemented. And ultimately, I would hope that the people who are actually responsible for and building the models will be the ones who will be doing that. They shouldn't need to rely on, you know, somebody else to come and check them. That should be part of the training to make them take ownership for that.
I saw that, but it's going to be a 30-second interlude. Okay. So I've got to have to wrap up because I've got someone standing on my shoulder.
So really quickly, just on the question of the ethics panel. The ethics panel is a messy meeting, right? It's conflicting views. It's about values. It's not meant to be a smooth thing there's meant to be disagreement. And as I always say, when an ethics panel finishes, we don't all walk out smiling. We walk out scratching our heads going, I think we got it. I think we got the best we could get. It's not automatable in that sense. I'll stop.
No, I love that. Just before I hand back to Julian, I want to do one last final hands up. So put your hands up if you feel slightly more optimistic, not about AI, but about your agency to ensure that AI might have a brighter future.
Yes.
Great.
There we are. You did a great job. Buy the book. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.